Ben smiled. "Yeah, we do," he said. He gestured to the others to hold back. "First dibs for our hero, Lucy," he shouted, laughing. The crowd joined in with a pained, grumbling sort of guffaw, but after only a moment their look of hunger returned, redoubled, and Lucy knew she'd only have a very little while to transact whatever it was she felt, inchoately, needed to be done there on the ground that morning. She kept her eye on the crowd, but leaned close to the guard again. "What's your name?" she whispered. "What?" "To Tom," he stammered. He was shaking all over now, constantly shivering under her as she leaned her body on his back. Even though she knew it'd probably terrify him into blubbering incoherence, Lucy couldn't help herself as she licked the back of his neck, a long, raspy raking of her dry, hard tongue up his spine. Soft and greasy, with a nice tickling from the hairs, but a little bitter. He put on too much of that smelly stuff. What was it called? Lucy remembered it was called perfume when girls wore it, but she'd forgotten what its name was when guys put it on. Tom squealed and almost seemed to go into convulsions at her touch, but she didn't really blame him for that. He was guilty of a lot of things, whoever he was, but disgust and terror were not under his control, and she wouldn't hold those weaknesses against him. "Quiet, Tom," she said, sitting up more and letting the residual blood in her mouth overpower the bitterness she just tasted. "We don't have long. You're going to die. They'll be quick about it, but it'll hurt a lot, I'm sure." No, you can stop them, please." He dragged out the last word into a wail. "I can't. We both know that. I'm not going to lie." He could only sob softly at this. "My name's Lucy, by the way." He sniffled and his crying diminished enough for him to say, "Okay." "I had a name all those times you humiliated me, degraded me, made me feel like shit." No, I told you, that wasn't me." He again fell to crying, this time high-pitched and uncontrollable. "Shh. Tom, don't get so upset. I'm not mad about that. We already said you're going to die. Soon. I'm giving you a chance not to have a lie as the last thing you said." She was bluffing, as she still wasn't sure it was him. But it wasn't like any of the guards were nice, so he should come clean, whoever he was, and about whatever he'd been up to. Pause. "You won't get mad? You won't hurt me?" "No, Tom, that's what they're going to do. And they don't care what you say. They're not listening. But I am. If you want to say something, say it. It's up to you. This ends the same." Pause. "It was me. I didn't know you could feel. I'm sorry." "Thank you." Lucy ran her hand through his hair. It felt nice. Dead people's hair had gotten so dry and stiff, like straw, and so faded, too. This was deliciously soft, and such a shiny light brown, like the fur of a frightened, quivering bunny. She could feel his revulsion again at her touch, though it was much less this time, just a barely perceptible tensing under her. "Tom, they're going to start soon," Lucy continued after a moment, seeing the crowd jostling one another, hearing their moans and shrieks. "I can put the gun in your hand and you can finish it if you want. I'd do that for you." He writhed under her and groaned. "I can't move either hand. I couldn't hold the gun." "Oh, sorry." She half wished she hadn't bitten his wrist now, but doubted he would have said all that needed to be said if she hadn't. "I feel cold." Pause. "You do it, please." Lucy looked at the gun. Nasty looking thing. It was different when Will handled them. He was so handsome to begin with and so innocent as well that he lent a certain peaceful glow even to such evil implements. But Lucy now felt the influence running the other way, like the weapon's cold brutality was infectious and creeping up her arm. She pressed the muzzle to the back of Tom's head and again wondered at how the living could ruin everything, even something as simple and glorious as killing, with their metallic, efficient, noisy tools. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Some in the crowd started hooting and jumping up and down, seemingly disappointed that their meal would be silent and motionless. Yes, please, please. All right. I'm sorry. I know. Thank you. Lucy gritted her teeth and closed her eye against the ugly, loud blast. Her ears still rang and her knees ached as she hauled herself to her feet and handed the gun to Christine. She was glad to feel the metal slip from her hand, though she winced as the tearing and snarling started behind her. Turning toward the hole in the fence, Lucy thought of how everything that had just occurred seemed to have an odd, inevitable grace about it. Perhaps because she planned none of it when she first had fallen on the guard. Christine and Carol joined her in shuffling from the compound, and she wondered how many other such moments she hadn't noticed before or since her death. So, thank you. And I believe Dan has gone to the trouble of having some questions even here.
I have several questions.
Okay.
Well, let's talk first about what your writing process is. I would assume it's drastically different doing the fiction than when you're planning out your nonfiction work. What's it like for each?
Interesting. I think there's been a similar trajectory in both, in that I'm just much more, I'm much more organized on that outline a lot more than I did when I was younger. I don't feel comfortable either with novels or nonfiction. I don't feel comfortable actually writing until I have a pretty thorough outline. Whereas I used to be able to kind of wing it. And I don't know if that makes anything better or worse than the way I used to write, but it's just something I feel intellectually I have to have before I can start on a project. Now I'm trying to think of the difference between the two. I mean, yeah, for fiction, what research there is, especially, I mean, things like guns, especially. I don't know that much about guns, or when I wrote one story and it had horses in it, right? I don't know anything about riding a horse. So the research that goes into fiction, I kind of just do it as I go, right? I realize I'm getting to a scene where people are riding horses, and I don't know how you do that or what you call the various parts of the saddle. So I got to go look that up. Research, obviously, on nonfiction is much more front-loaded. That's where I do significant months of research before the book even starts.
What's your thoughts on the e-books and all the new media and the Kindles and the Nooks? Are you happy? Are you excited? Does it not make any difference to you as long as the material's getting out there?
As far as I know, much more feelings of the latter. I mean, that it's just another line on my royalties statement. And as some of you may know, authors get more royalties for electronic books than for regular, because the regular books obviously cost more for the publisher to produce. So they can afford to pay us more for the e-books. So in a way that's good. And it's just something that in the last couple of years, the e-book sales have been growing pretty steadily. Anecdotally, in terms of what I see people reading, that seems to me, maybe it's just because I haven't been on a flight for a while, but I guess when I flew a couple of weeks ago, many more people had Kindles and Nooks than I remember from the last time I flew. So it seems like in the past couple of years, it's really grown. Not gradually, but really kind of suddenly.
Do you see a lot of, as a lot of people here talking, and myself included, I'm a bit torn on it. I have that nostalgia feeling for the book. I like to put them on the shelves.
Sure.
But I really embrace the fact that I can load up a tablet with, and if I decide to read something today, it's right there, it's readily available. And tomorrow, if I want to read a completely different thing, it's already there, and I don't have to, you don't have to take up the space. I hear a lot of authors kind of lament the fact that the books are dying, but they're happy with the Kindle sales.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so
And it's something where I mean, the level of, exactly as you say, the level of convenience, the sheer quantity of information, and I suppose you know, MP3 is the same on the music end. And as you say, I mean, as an old person, I guess I'm an old person now. You know, it's nostalgia, and there's also a different aesthetic. You know, I mean, even before MP3s, we'd all pretty much lost the feeling of like cover art, right? Because you can't do cover art on a CD is kind of laughable. Right? It's this little tiny thing. Whereas cover art on an LP was a big part of, as you say, admiring, looking at, touching, displaying this thing. It was part of the aesthetic experience, and that's just totally gone. And I do think we're probably headed towards something where hard copy books, you know, there will be a collector's market, I guess, for it, you know, and signed ones or particularly nice limited editions. But in terms of cheap disposable reading, why would you have a mass market paperback if you could have an electronic?
Question I've been asking everyone on the panels, and it's purely your own opinion. What is your opinion of the state of the horror genre in general, whether it's movies, books? Are you happy with the things that come out that you see? Would you rather do you gravitate more towards the underground versus, we'll call it the mainstream or the Hollywood style?
Mm-hmm.
Are you okay with the Hollywood style? Some people are okay, it's got its problems, but basically it's doing its job, getting the genre out to people.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you put it that way, I mean, it almost sounds like a sort of elitism, you know, like there's real horror, right? And some people want to like hold on to that or preserve that, and they would see popular horror as somehow a sellout or a dilution of that. I'm just never much in favor of elitism in general. You know, whether it's about religion or horror or music or whatever. Different people like different things, and I don't see that we have to be again elitist and feel that our particular flavor that we particularly like is the right one, the only one, the God-chosen one, and all the other flavors out there are bad. Now, what was the other part of the state of it? You know, in some ways, I'm thrilled when it appeals to a larger audience. I was thrilled with The Walking Dead. You know, I've been telling people about that a lot, because that was something where I thought they and this speaks partly to your question of, you know, small genre, small audience versus a large audience. I thought they did a great job in that of appealing to both. You know, that this was, I mean, especially, I mean, when they I assume you all have seen that. I mean, when they hack the guy apart and smear his innards all over themselves, I couldn't believe that was on basic cable. Was my first reaction. So I think they were clearly doing a good job of appealing to an audience that's used to that level of violence and gore, and yet they were drawing a huge audience of regular people, because at the same time it was also that kind of story, right? And that in that sense it was faithful to the comic book too. I mean, The Walking Dead is not ultimately about killing lots of zombies. It's about, you know, all these sort of petty, ridiculous, and sometimes very violent things that the living survivors do to each other. And that's what we're going to come back to, whether we come back to the comic book each month or we come back to the show each week. That's we want to see what happens to these people.